Ara veurem el professor Emmanuele Pavolini a la... Esperem fins a... Està, no? Sí, ja ho sé que està, sí, m'està escrivint.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay.
Ciao, Emmanuele.
Buenos días.
Buenos días. You can hear me?
Yeah,
Can you see us?
I can see you.
Okay, good.
Which is already a start.
Thank you very much, Emmanuele, for, I was going to say coming here, but of course it's in a virtual sense. We wish we had you here among us, but we've got used to this mixed reality. You have a full house, but you also have many listeners at home. So we have almost 200 people following the event. So thank you again for coming. Emmanuele Pavolini, he's professor at the University of Macerata in Italia. We've invited Professor Pavolini not only because he's an academic expert on family policy and Southern European welfare states in general. I have to say I've had the privilege of working with him in several occasions throughout the years. This has been a constant worry, not just academic, but also personal and political. But it's not just that, he's also been the promoter of the Alleanza per l'Infanzia in Italy, which is actually something that it's very close to what's happening in Spain and in Barcelona right now. I don't know whether you were able to follow the political representatives, but in Barcelona there is a plan that was approved about a month ago. It's sort of a long-term plan up to 2030, and it's very ambitious because this morning we listened to the word commitment several times. So it's not just commitment to reduce levels of child poverty, which is actually very high, as we know, in Southern European countries, in Italy and Spain, for a long time, and it has become pretty structural. But it's not just about material conditions. It's also about rights, and we listen to them formulate the extent to which we had to look at the rights of children and not just the material conditions of the families in which they live. So from that perspective, issues of political participation become very relevant, issues of access to health, access to education, but also access to public space, for instance. This is a great concern for the Barcelona Council. So on that expertise you have, we would very much like you to first give us a sense of where the issue of child poverty is placed in the wider European agenda. And then secondly, if you could sort of give us some hints of that experience of a sort of a new opening dialogue between academia and the political arena, which we think it's quite essential. So Emmanuele, thank you again. The floor is yours. You have about 30 minutes.
Marga, thanks, and thanks everybody for the invitation. I apologize, I cannot be in Barcelona. I would have loved it. I'm currently visiting for several months Copenhagen, the University of CBS at Copenhagen. So I'm in Denmark, but I can tell you as a kind of a sad joke that during the hardest months of lockdown during COVID, there were two cities where I wanted us absolutely to go back. And I was dreaming about them. One is Lisbon and the other one is Barcelona. So it hasn't been this time, but I hope to be back in Catalonia soon. My presentation, following what Marga said, will be on 3 different points. So what are the EU opportunities for developing a child-centered strategy for the next, for this decade, practically? What are the challenges? What are the solutions? And when I'm going to talk about the solutions, I will talk also about our experience of Alleanza per l'Infanzia, so the Italian experience as an example of what we can do. So the opportunities are there. There are at least three important major developments at the EU level, which can be very important for policies at the municipal level, regional level, state level. The first of them is the recovery fund. With Marga, for instance, we wrote together a paper looking at the contents of the Spanish and Italian recovery funds plans. And compared to previous funding from the EU, there's been a lot of attention on childcare, on education poverty, so investment in education and investment in childcare. So a relatively decent amount of money, I use decent to use a euphemism because also I want to see if it really happens, will arrive to our countries as several others to invest in children-centered policies. The second very big opportunity, more from in my ideas, is more as an opportunity to rethink policies than in terms of real money, is the child guarantee. As you know, last June, there was this recommendation from the European Council on the child guarantee, which goes exactly, as far as my Catalan goes, in the direction of what the previous speakers have said. Now, why am I saying that the child guarantee is an opportunity more as a way to rethink policies for the youth and for children than actually financing them? Because there is money there. There is earmarked social fund money coming from the EU with the participation of states and local administrations. But really, the childcare approach recommendation is more about what should be our priorities and what we should really do. And I'll be back to that in a while. Currently, I am the leading expert, not the leading expert, but the leader of a research group working for UNICEF in drafting their deep dive on the child care, on the child guarantee for Italy. So I've been spending a lot of my last months exactly on this topic. Then we should not forget that Europe is also about the work-life balance directive. So fostering a different idea of parental leave, work-life balance, which, again, it's interesting, in different European countries is creating different types of debates. Here in Denmark, just to give you an idea, was the main employer association who picked it up, saying we have to apply it and it's a good thing. There are other countries I know, starting from mine, where a lot of employers, for instance, have more problems with this idea of the directive, because when you have small enterprises, it's kind of tough, but it's necessary. So we have a lot of opportunities there from Europe, apart from, of course, what we do in our own territories. But then we have three challenges. A first challenge is, in a way, a trilemma. Family policies for children can be mainly made by three different tools. Cash, so transfers. The speaker before me was talking about that, if I understood it correctly, what he was saying in Catalan. So, if we need to fight child poverty, if we need to support families, even if they're not poor, in having children, we need to give them money. It's quite clear. And it's important we state it like that, because for decades in Europe, there was almost a kind of a fight between those who said we needed services and those who said we need cash transfers. What we know is we need, as it was said before, an integrated strategy. You cannot support families with children if you just rely on services, but as well, you can't support them just through cash transfers. But cash transfers are important for families with children at risk of poverty. And in Southern Europe, households with children are some of the most exposed to the risk of poverty exactly because they have children. And we have to fight that. But then at the same time, we have to allocate money to parental leave. And usually in Southern Europe is not that generous as in other countries, as for instance, where I am now here in Denmark, where is a very huge thing. And cash, so cash, services, and parental leave, how to find the right mix. There is no easy solution, but this is the first trilemma. Then the second trilemma we have to face as a challenge is exactly on childcare services. And the trilemma has three magic words: coverage, quality, and equality. What do I mean? You've seen it in Spain, you've seen it in Catalonia, I've seen it in Italy and everywhere in Europe. In the last 20 years, there's been a huge pressures from households with children to have more childcare places. So families are pushing for coverage, higher coverage, which is good. The problem is, if we increase coverage, this has not to come at the expense of either quality or equality. Quality of education in childcare is something simple, is how you recruit and treat in terms of working conditions the professionals who are the educators and teachers working in this field. In several countries, what we've seen is that in order to increase coverage, but not to increase the budget, we have reduced the quality of work conditions. So you have countries, regions have relaxed the criteria for hiring, the type of labor contracts, but this is a narrow-minded strategy, not just because workers are in worse conditions, but it's also a narrow-minded strategy because, again, childcare is made by a face-to-face service. If you have not decently paid, unsatisfied, badly recruited workers, educators, and teachers, you will not have a good quality childcare. And as a lot of literature tells us, is a kind of a paradox. If you have to choose between letting the child stay at home or having a bad childcare service, the least worst solution is leaving the child at home. So we can't give up quality. Last corner of the trilemma, we can't give up equality as well. In many countries, what we've seen in the last 20 years was that families on average had a better access to childcare facilities. But depending on the country, several social groups are left, or they want to be left. I'm not entering into why it happens, but they are behind. So in many countries, children of migrants tend to go to childcare services, education services, less than natives. In several countries, the higher the education of the parents, the higher the likelihood of having their children in a childcare, in a nursery or in a kindergarten. Whereas parents with low education have less chances, or they tend to send less their children to childcare. But again, we can't have inequality starting from the cradle. We can't have a situation where already when children are 1 year old, depending on their family backgrounds, they will have chances to grow and improve their skills and their quality of living or not. So we have to find a way, which is difficult, to manage coverage increase, to keep quality decent, if not high, and be careful at a quality, which, of course, if you want to look at it from the other side, is inequality. Third major challenge, and I see it right now working on the child guarantee. Why am I saying this? Because the child guarantee, the first thing that says is look at potential beneficiaries. So who should be the beneficiaries of a child guarantee as priorities in your country? And the recommendation, because there are a lot of different potential profiles of groups of beneficiaries. They discuss about migrant children, they discuss about children with disabilities, but they also discuss about children in complicated household situations. So children with their parents in jail, children who have just one single, in a single parent household, children coming from ethnic minorities. Usually the main reference is to Roma and other groups, gypsy groups. Now, if you look at these groups, they do not have, of course, the same needs, but they also do not have the same size. So what is clearly feasible, what I clearly see in Italy, for instance, but I've seen it similar to other countries, that practically you have two different groups of beneficiaries. Very large groups of potential beneficiaries in terms of children beneficiaries. So I'm thinking about children in low-income families, which are a big group both in Italy and Spain, with the difference that in Italy, they're all mostly concentrated in the south. In Spain, they are more spread in different areas of the country. And even and of course, they are located differently even within comunidades autónomas or regions, okay? So they're in different areas. So this is the very first big group. Then you have migrants, children with the migratory background as a big group. As a third group, you have children with disabilities and children living in a one-parent household. Okay. Then there is another group I'll talk to you later on in my last part of my presentation. So on one hand, you have these big groups. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, sometimes millions of people, of children. Then you have smaller groups where the intensity of need is much higher. Children in alternative care, migrant children with parents who are irregular migrants. Again, as I was saying before, children with parents in jail or one of the two parents in jail. So the point is, again, how much a plan which aims at fighting child social exclusion or in favor of children inclusion should focus on the broad groups or should develop specific strategies for the groups that are, from a quantitative perspective, not too big, but they often live a very high and stressing situation. Of course, you're going to say, well, there is not a problem there. You should do both. Yeah, but then you have to think about money. Okay. At the end, unless you want to write a plan where we're going to do everything, but then we don't know where we get the money from. What I've learned about policymaking, that at a certain point you have to make choices. And there is, of course, not the right solution. We talk about solutions now, but it has to be clear that at a certain point, you have to find on how to allocate the resources between the small groups with a very intense need of support and the larger groups. Because the risk is at the same time that either you focus just on the small groups because you see them in dire straits and you think these are the most in need, but then you forget you have millions of other children that would need some sort of support, okay? Or the opposite, you forget the small groups, minorities who are in big trouble. For the last 15 minutes of my presentation, I've passed to solutions. Okay, the first thing is, and it's quite clear, it was clear to me before coming to Denmark, but it's even clearer now because here I see it at work. The first problem you have at the municipal level, at the regional level, at the state level is coordination, institutional coordination. What do I mean by that? A plan for children has to put children at the center, which means you can't just simply say, okay, there is the education department doing something, then there is the social work department doing something else, then there is the health department, and so on. So what you usually find in a good part of continental and Southern Europe is a kind of a fragmented and not integrated intervention where different departments, or at the municipal level, or ministries at the regional and state level, just walk different paths toward the same type of beneficiaries. So you might find the same family, of course, receiving some sort of support for childcare, education, then there is healthcare, but they are not coordinated. And it's really hard to coordinate education, health, education departments, healthcare departments, and social service departments for obvious reasons. I don't have to repeat them here. So the first thing that is needed is not that a department takes the lead over the others, but there is the institution of some formal coordination among departments or ministries which deal with childcare and deal with children from different perspectives, where they have to meet regularly and have a kind of a coordinated approach. This is very important. It doesn't have to be formal. It has to be substantial. So you need directors of departments, ministers doing that on a regular basis, sitting around the table, where the point is, it's not an issue of coordinating education, the education department with the healthcare department. It's about, okay, we've got children. How do we coordinate what we do in schools with what we do in healthcare facilities of different kinds? Second important point, outreach services. Again, usually in a good part of Europe, we are good when children arrive in education, infrastructures, in healthcare facilities. Spain is one of the countries with the highest level of satisfaction for how healthcare works in general. And I guess Catalonia is even more than the Spanish average, having studied some time ago the regional healthcare systems in Spain. The same we can say for childcare. Once a child gets into childcare, usually gets a good childcare service. The problem is you need to know how to get access to these services. And some of the groups that are socially excluded are groups that have problems to find their way around. So we need to develop a kind of a proactive strategy on how institutions and civic society reaches families with children in order to help them. Third point in terms of solutions, which is very important. What I've learned in this year is mental health and child care and children. That is a huge problem, especially after COVID. Usually when we develop policies for children, we think about education poverty, we think about income poverty, we think about childcare, we think about access to normal healthcare services, and so on. But we need to strengthen our mental health facilities for children. That is a big thing, at least from the Italian perspective. I hope the situation in Spain looks better, but I have discovered a world that frightened me. In Italy, right now, like the mental health professional associations of doctors says that probably around 20% of children under 18 have some sort of mental health problems, partially related to COVID and post-COVID, partially related to different kinds of stress, depression, and so on. It's a huge number. Now, just in the last 10 minutes, I had a couple of other things, and I get to our experience as Alleanza for just describing what it is. The other point is increased childcare provision, but Spain and Catalonia are in the good road, and Barcelona to do that. Lowering the cost for households and families to send their children to childcare provision. That's very important. And again, now I come to Alleanza. Why do I put Alleanza in the part of the solution? Alleanza per l'Infanzia if you want, I can just put here on the chat. Let me do it. Yeah, I can put the site, the website. Alianza per l'Infanzia was created exactly as Marga said. I mean, if you want, it was created out of a frustration of a group of scholars, including myself. When I said, look, we've been studying family policies for years, we've been working with local authorities sometimes, but sometimes it seems that there is a kind of a disconnection between how decisions are taken in local authorities, regional authorities, state authorities, what civic society develops as ideas on how family policies, childcare policies should be run, and what scholars do. So let's try to find a place where we put together scholars doing research on family policy, telling them they don't have to come and tell us what is the best solution in general. They have to come and also work. And that's why, for instance, among us, there are not just economists or demographers, but there are also political scientists who know how the policymaking process works. So the point for once is trying to see how you can try to support the policymaking process in a proactive way, in a way of saying, I know how decision-making works, I know how the politics of decision-making works in a normal democracy, it has its rules. How can we support it in a way that is helpful for family policies and for children? So it's less about telling what is, half of it is about what should be done, and half of it is about how should we organize our alliance in order to support the policymaking going in a certain direction, of course, respecting decisions. So practically the Alianza is made, as I said, by civic society organizations, including the 3 most important trade unions in Italy. There is also Save the Children, Action Aid. I'm talking about international organizations, and then national Italian organizations dealing with children from different perspectives. There are institutions. There is UNICEF. We started working also with the association, although it's not part yet, I hope it's just a yet, but although it's not formally part, we started to work with the associations of municipalities in Italy when we discuss about childcare and services, and there are a group of scholars. The organization has a kind of a light structure, so we really do not have practically a budget. We have just a budget for our web page. There are 3 speakers. One is myself, the other one is Chiara Saraceno, and the third one is Alessandro Ruggina. It's very horizontal. So decisions are totally democratic. So the first point is we regularly produce documents either on what is on the agenda of the political discussion in that moment, or in order or hope to start a discussion about something we think is important for families with children. But we take the decisions in a very democratic way. Of course, when you have 80 different participants in a network representing from trade unions to single scholars, it's normal that there is not a total agreement on everything. So the basic idea is that our documents share, in our documents, we share what is the core agreement on our points. So what we all agree after having a lot of debates among us. And in this way, using Zoom, for instance, as an instrument had helped us a lot to democratize the participation, because you don't need to be physically somewhere. During the COVID months, we had regular meetings every 15 days, and they were highly participated. And we went from suggestions on how to reform the parental leave schemes in Italy to how to strengthen childcare. And now we are very active and vocal on the next generation recovery fund implementation on the part of childcare. So we work a lot. The group has grown. Right now, it probably, and is able to connect also to other groups. So that it's not just about social care. There are like pediatricians, so it's about healthcare. There are a lot of people from the education groups. And Alleanza per l'Infanzia has then entered another network of networks, which is called Educazioni. So on a first level, there are civic society organizations, institutions, and scholars. They get together, and that is Alleanza. Then on a second level, Alleanza is part of another network with other 9 networks of organizations who deal with childcare or more with issues related to education. The word itself, it says it, okay, from different perspectives. So practically, we are in a kind of a double level network, which means a lot of meetings, but a lot of interesting discussions and documents production. I have to say that this type of model worked a lot. We had in the last 1.5 years, several meetings with ministers. We work mostly at the state level. So we had several meetings with ministers, with the previous Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte. We sent documents. We had hearings in the Parliament. Myself, Chiara, Alessandro, and others have been doing that. We've been called in various commissions, some of us, and we exchange information. So we are really working as a network in a very transparent way, in the sense that our goals are clear. Practically, it's what I told you, in a way, synthesizes 70% of our goals. We produce scientifically based documents. We listen and discuss a lot. And it works really well also to interact as much as possible with social media and traditional medias. So quite often when we produce documents, we discuss them also with journalists, apart from our own networks, social networks participation. But I have to say that from my personal experience, and I have just 1 minute left, so I'll be perfectly on time, 30 minutes, has been one of the most satisfying experience, even if probably in respect to what I would have liked to see in terms of policy agenda, we reached 70–80% of what we wanted. But it's one of the first times where I see that a group of people are able, in a way, to participate in a discussion. And why is that? Because I think, at least I talk about Italy, but I think it's a general issue. Before COVID already, with increasing poverty and problems in a lot of our countries, and with COVID even more, there is a window of opportunity for social actors like Alleanza, for instance, to join forces and to discuss with political actors in a very open and democratic way on how to improve the future of our generations, which are children. So compared, for instance, to Italy 10 years ago, Alleanza had more chances to discuss and interact with the political world and political actors in an open and frank way. And I think this is part of the future. So I really invite you to, you've done it probably partially, it's quite similar, but I invite you, and that's my last message, to keep on working into this direction of collaboration between institution, trade union, the rest of civic society, and experts coming from the university, not necessarily coming from the university. A lot of other experts are not university professors, are pediatricians, for instance, or psychologists. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Emmanuele. Because we were a bit behind on time, we are allowed to finish a little bit later, so we do have these 15 minutes. I will be taking questions from the floor in a moment, but just let me reflect on what you raised in your presentation, which I think it's quite crucial. You asked 2 questions. One was, who should have access? Sorry, they've told me to look at the camera, not at you. And this is quite weird, but I will, I will just imagine the camera is yourself. Anyway, so the two questions were, who should have access to the programs, to the benefits? I think this is a crucial question. Whether we should try and aim to be universal, so all children should benefit, or whether we should target only those that are most vulnerable should have access to programs and benefits, knowing that resources are always limited. I think this is a fundamental question, which it becomes a political question, I think, and there are a number of trade-offs that of course need to be addressed. I think in the case of Barcelona, for instance, when you make an effort to give priority access to certain benefits, for instance, nurseries, the Escoles Versió, then you might have the middle class quite angry, because they also think they have a right to a good quality public service, and they can't access. So there is a dilemma here that's worth addressing, I think, politically. And the second relevant question was, how should resources be allocated? And I think, again, this becomes a crucial question now, especially with the recovery funds, with all that money that's going to arrive from the European Union. We had a session last week on urban transition, so nothing to do with childhood or child poverty. And one of the speakers, Uriol Nelo, was saying, show us a graph where we could see how the transition to green energies was distributed across different social groups, and the bias was huge, right? Yeah. So we had rich neighborhoods that are already implementing some rehabilitation and transition process in that respect. And so the question here becomes, if we are not careful, we're going to have sort of flow of cash, not just for sort of social affairs, but for other policy domains as well. But if we are not careful, that flow of cash might not serve to reduce social gaps, but might actually increment, it might actually increase these gaps. So I think it's a question that should be really very carefully reflected upon every time there is a discussion as to how those funds are going to be distributed, because the risk in social context where inequality is very high, the risk of increasing inequality, it's actually higher. So maybe if you would give an advice, what sort of advice would you give in that respect? I think that this is a question, I know it's not easy to answer, but how would you sort of manage that balance between having the aim to be universal, but needing to target benefits at the same time? Regarding the Alianza per l'Infància that you talked about, if you could, I think you've done a great job in explaining the process, how that was constituted, that attempt to really bring a sort of mixing people coming from very diverse domains, different actors, the need to work across different administrative units. This is always a challenge for administrations that are used to compartmentalize tasks, and also different levels of government. So if you could sort of say a little bit more about the hurdles, the difficulties in that need to work in a mainstream way across. The other question that I had from the organizers was that if you could reflect on the pandemic a little bit, whether the situation generated by the COVID-19 might actually have triggered that need for action in that respect. Before you answer, I would collect questions from the floor, from the audience, if there are any. Preguntas? Sí.
És més una reflexió o una alerta en relació a l'accés als serveis. Estem acostumats a fer una reflexió sobre com incorporar tots aquests estrats, diguéssim, que normalment es queden fora dels serveis, no? Però em sembla que en el context actual, i com s'apuntava en la primera part de la sessió, en què estem parlant també d'accedir a prestacions econòmiques, aquí tenim sobre la taula un repte que encara és més enorme, no? Que és el tema de garantir l'accés de totes aquelles prestacions que s'estan derivant cap a un procés de l'administració que està aprofundint en la digitalització i que, per tant, està obrint una bretxa encara més gran entre diferents estrats socials. I vinculat al tema de les prestacions, ja que el tema, diguéssim, de garantir uns mínims de vida crec que està com bastant instal·lat a nivell polític, crec que hauríem de començar a parlar de com aquestes prestacions es gestionen. I en relació a la gestió vull dir diverses coses. La primera, que fa referència precisament a això, a l'accés. Com garantim l'accés de totes aquestes persones amb el tema de la digitalització, però també de la gestió, com es gestionen aquestes prestacions. Actualment estan caient sobre els serveis socials i no s'està dotant de personal administratiu que pugui gestionar les prestacions i, per tant, estem malbaratant molts recursos en aquell personal tècnic que té un coneixement i que està portant un valor afegit en la interacció i en la intervenció social per a que gestionin prestacions i facin tràmits burocràtics. I crec que això és un problema greu a nivell de gestió. D'altra banda, aquestes famílies sovint...
Sorry, I don't have a translation.
You don't?
No.
No, you
perhaps
don't.
I can't activate it. So sorry. No, my proposal is... No. My proposal is I can understand a bit of Catalan.
El tema de la digitalització amb accés a prestacions.
Sí.
Esto lo entendé.
De la gestió.
El tema de la gestió. Després, què passa amb totes aquestes famílies que molt sovint tenen deutes i que la prestació fa que sobrepassin llindars de tributació i que, per tant, aquí crec que hi hauria d'haver també una reforma fiscal en certa mesura per a que aquestes prestacions no tinguessin la mateixa consideració que tenen els ingressos derivats del treball. I un tema que no és gens baladí, que és qui és el titular d'aquestes prestacions a la infància, si són els progenitors o són els infants. I aquí entrem amb el tema de la complementarietat entre les diferents prestacions. Gràcies.
Gracias, Eloy. Before we move on, I think I'll translate, otherwise I'll forget. So there were 3 points.
Marga, sorry. If you might translate it, it's great. For the next one, if it would be possible to hear it in Castilian, because I understand Castilian a bit better, if it's possible, so we shorten it.
Él entiende y habla el castellano, entonces es más fácil, no hace falta que traduzca yo si se hace directamente en castellano. Anyway, so the first issue was the digital gap. Yeah, so it was reflecting on to what extent the digitalization of administration, the procedures to access benefits, those that do not have the access to the digital means might actually be derived from even applying to these benefits. That was the first. And the last 2 had to do with the management, of which I'm not sure you'll be able to say much, but with the management of the programs, especially when it's about giving directly cash to families. On that point, children. One important issue that Eloy raised was who really should be the beneficiaries.
The child or the family?
The child directly, or should it be
the parents?
The family?
Yeah.
Otra pregunta? Sí. Sí, os podéis introducir así brevemente.
I can't hear.
Sí.
Okay.
Soy Carlos Gil, jefe del Departamento de Promoción de la Infancia del Ayuntamiento de Barcelona. Emmanuele, muchas gracias por tu presentación. Ha sido muy estimulante y me ha encantado. Muy brevemente, quería preguntarte cómo está recogida la voz de los niños y las niñas en la estrategia que tú planteas, en concreto cómo participan los niños y las niñas en la alianza, en todo un poco lo que planteas. Un poco recuperando la idea que has dicho de colocar al niño y a la niña en el centro de cualquier política hacia ellos, ¿no? Solo eso.
Gracias.
Sí. ¿Alguna más? So, Emmanuele, if you'd like to, can spend a few minutes.
5 minutos. Okay.
5-10, sí.
Okay, I'll try. Okay. Thanks a lot again. Thanks again for all the questions. I'll start with universalism targeting. I would say that what I found out in this year and a half is not just, as you say, should be a universalistic approach or a target-oriented approach. There is also something else. I don't know if I translated correctly in English, but I would call it categorization. So for instance, in Italy, in a lot of times, the big problem I have working with ministries is that they rather think about specific targets of beneficiaries instead of developing not just a universalist, but a kind of a cross groups strategy. So you find yourself, so for instance, in Italy and partially in Spain, we have a huge problem of children dropping out of school, okay? So the issue is, should we try to find a strategy to tackle drop out children from schools? Or you find yourself sometimes with somebody saying, well, we've got a specific program for gypsies children dropping out of school, and the project is just about that. And then you have to try to explain them that if you talk with teachers, when you find dropouts, usually they share some common traits. So it's like universalism target versus targeting, but there is also this problem of categorization, which in a way is partially targeting. I have no solutions. I rather have a universalistic approach. So most of the analysis that I've done, most of the focus groups and meetings I had for this child guarantee deep dive I did for UNICEF, a lot of the experts tell me, especially for education poverty, so in school, in childcare, you've got to go for real universalism. Having highly target policies, which of course, I mean, education is universalist by definition in Spain and Italy. So it's not the point of saying we should think about education run differently. But the point is, we have a lot of people dropping out of school, a lot of people finishing schools with not good knowledge. Spain is even more extreme than Italy, for instance. In Spain, you have a high level of people who go to tertiary education, higher than in Italy, and a lot of people who fail in secondary education. So there, I think we have to go universal or universalistic. I know sometimes it's hard when you work with departments, because of course, and I mean, that's also a risk for the next generation and for the recovery plan, because of course it's quite easier for a municipal or regional or state department to say, you know, we receive 100,000 euros. We had a very specific target, children from, I don't know, lone parents, and we did ABC. So targeting, in a way, it's easier to organize and to make it accountable from an administrative perspective. But it might not necessarily be the best thing in the long run. I know it's a lot harder to say we got to fight dropout in schools and we got to implement general policies. But in the long run, universalism is what pays, because we got what is called peer effects. So children and young adults stay together. It doesn't really make sense that you focus just on 2 children and you forget the other 7 in the room. How to allocate resources? Yeah, I mean, I think the risk of inequality is something that has to be taken very seriously. We are risking increasingly among young children to have already 2 different groups. Those who are left behind already from kindergarten to education, and the others. So we are, compared to 30 years ago, our societies are polarizing more, also for children. And so I'll give you a very, very short example. When I work with municipalities in Italy, I tell them to be careful in childcare, for instance, on what are the criteria through which they prioritize children who should have access to childcare. Usually in big cities, municipalities do not have enough childcare places for everybody, especially on nurseries, 0 to 2. Okay, so they have to give themselves some priorities. Who gets there first? And I tell them to be very careful, because a lot of Italian municipalities, as a main criteria, use both parents have to work. So nurseries are thought in the mind of many municipalities as a way to reconcile for parents. So I also go to further questions, not to a child right to education. And I tell them, be careful. If your main criteria for saying who gets the service first is both parents have to work, you know that a lot of groups will be sacrificed, because that's a typical middle and upper class situation, to have stable dual earner families. So equality or inequality has to be there. Difficulties for Alleanza, going very fast on that and the pandemic. I think there were not too many difficulties. We had less than expected. Of course, you have to work a lot on finding a synthesis on very different positions. I mean, on a lot of issues, there is not the right answer. I mean, what we'll be discussing about targeting on universalism, there is not the right solution. It's an issue of trying to find a balance, which is a kind of a second best option. So I don't think we had too many problems so far. We've seen only good points. I don't know if the bad problems will be ahead. So far, I haven't seen too many of them. The pandemic triggered need for action, absolutely. What we've seen in a lot of countries is that the pandemic showed us that the whole education system has also an impact on reconciliation. I mean, one of the big issues in Spain and Italy about school closures, childcare facility closures during the lockdown was, this is going to be bad for the children, but it's going to be bad also for the working parents and their reconciliation. So compared to previous times, the pandemic, children, reconciliations, and more in general, issues that have to do with families with children have become clearly more at the center stage. Will they remain there? I don't know. Right now, we have opportunities that they will remain there. The digital divide, the digital gap is very important. So for instance, in this respect, one of the proposals we are going to make for Italy, I don't know if it's going to be heard, is that we need to have a kind of a network at the local level of facilitators, let's call them like that, and people doing exactly outreach services going to the families. So my idea is we should have a kind of a universal service where is either based at the municipal level, so social services in the municipality, or in healthcare districts. But we should have a group of professionals that what they do is that in different phases of in the life cycle of a child, they go and regularly check and talk to the families. So the idea would be transforming how we work. Is not social work or psychologists waiting for people to go and ask for help when they have children and problems. Is the other way around. Every family who has a child, who has a recent born child, I don't know, 3 months after the child is born, should receive a visit from professionals sent either by the municipality or the healthcare facilities, just checking up how they're doing. just if they have problems, just informing about them about opportunities of healthcare, education, childcare support, and so on. And this should be done regularly for every children in a municipality or a region. After 3 months, 6 months in the child life, 1 year, 3 year, and so on. So you go as a public service. The idea came to me while I was here in Denmark. Here in Denmark, they do something that I think is great. And it's not about childcare, it's about elderly care. In Denmark, everybody who turns 75 has not just the right, will receive at home the visit of social workers or other people sent by the municipalities and the healthcare system, just checking up how he or she is doing, informing them about services and how to have access if they have problems, a general assessment. And if everything is fine, then you say, okay, we'll see each other in a few years or just call us. But it's the whole idea that I like. The idea is that we have to go to every family, in this case, in our case for childcare, telling them, look, the state is here, the municipality is here, civic society is here. And if you don't know you have these opportunities, tell us if you think you have problems. We do a very light assessment together. If we are able to create something like that, this would be a huge, it wouldn't be too costly. At the same time, it wouldn't be cheap. But it would be, I think, the only way of creating a kind of a new outreach service in a universal way, apart from everything else that we usually have on childcare plans. Just last question, sorry, I went very late. How do we include children? This is something, okay, if you think about difficulties for the Alianza, yeah, this would be one. So far, we haven't been able to include directly children in the way Alianza works. But at the same time, a good part of the associations that are part of Alianza, Save the Children, they have created their own ways, formal ways, to try to include young children in the way, to give them voice. So in a way, so far, but we will have to find better solutions. We here as Alianza, Children Voices, through the mechanisms created to listen to them and include them by some of the most and biggest associations that are part of Alianza, who do that, who have started to do that on a regular basis. Sorry for having spoken too long.
Thank you very much, Emmanuele. Aquí damos por concluida para no comernos el coffee break. Muchas gracias, Emmanuele. La próxima esperamos que puedas venir presencialmente aquí, pero nos has dejado muchas ideas sobre la mesa para, espero, retomar en las sesiones que quedan. Tengo que dar una serie de avisos. Una es que volvemos a las 11:30, mantenemos el horario de la vuelta. Otra es que no hay servicio de café aquí, pero están avisados en el bar. Y la tercera es que por favor devolváis los aparatos de traducción. Gracias.
Gracias a todas y todos. Buen día. Hasta pronto. Thank you.